Dennis MacDonald, I have a question from a guy named Lawrence. Not sure if he wants me to give out his full name because he messaged me. I'm what's known as a lapsed Catholic. Some would say apostate. I haven't heard anything on your show about "You are Peter, and upon you I shall build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail." I don't have the quote exactly, but you know the one. Catholics believe this to be the actual beginning of the Roman Catholic Church, but I think that's just ridiculous. I don't believe Jesus actually ever said this, but the words were interpolated later by the gospel writers. I tell Catholics the best you can say Jesus founded might be another sect of Judaism. Love your show. Hope your move is going well. So I'm going to rephrase this question without asking, did Jesus say this or not? Taking this to you, which most likely he probably didn't say, but anyway, who knows? Does this play into any of your Greek connections in this passage?
No, it doesn't play into the Greek mythology and so on, say the Homeric epics or whatever, but it is a fascinating trajectory. And Lawrence, I'm so glad you asked the question. And I think the quest ought to begin with the Q document. And I know not all the viewers, and maybe not you yourself, Lawrence, hold to the Q hypothesis. But in my view, the Q document considers the 12 to be exemplary transmitters of the kingdom of God's message after Jesus's death. And Peter is named along with the other 12 in the Q document, in my view. It's Q plus, it's not traditional Qs. And all of them, none is singled out for special attention. And so Peter is there with them as a trustworthy transmitter of the tradition. But all of them are, and they travel two by two in the proclamation. The Gospel of Mark comes along, and he does not like that. In fact, the 12 include Judas Iscariot, who is the betrayer, Peter, who denies Jesus 3 times. The women never tell the disciples to go to Galilee, and so they never see the risen Jesus. And James or Jacob and John asked to sit at Jesus's right and left hands, and it's the thieves that are at Jesus's right and left hand. So the 12 disciples, including Peter, are losers, and Peter is the biggest loser, other than Judas. So Matthew comes along. And he's looking for a reliable transmitter of the tradition from the 12 and from Jesus himself. And it's in the Gospel of Mark where Jesus says to the disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter says that you are the Christ, the Son of God, and so on. There are variations on that. And Matthew takes that as an opportunity to say that Peter is the coolest. He's the one, it's on him or on his confession that the church is going to be built. And so it also, then you have the keys of what is bound in heaven is bound on earth, and so on. So it certainly is secondary. It doesn't come from the Q document. It does not come from Mark directly, but it's a spin-off of what we find in the Gospel of Mark. Now, but let's go back to the Gospel of Mark. This passage is really quite interesting, and I know Derek is going to have something to say because of the confession at Caesarea Philippi that we've talked about before, and I'm going to ask him to pick up on that in a minute. But the other is that we have in Mark several recognitions of Jesus's identity. One of them is by the woman who anoints Jesus for his death That's based on the Eurycleia episode, and where she's and in the issue of Simon Peter, the disciples are not to tell anybody that Jesus is the Messiah, even though Peter gets it right. So you do have that kind of echo of the Odyssey, where Jesus and Odysseus have kept their identity a secret. Then when people find it out, they are commanded to secrecy. But Matthew is looking for a member of the 12 that can be a representative leader after Jesus's death for the community. Now, the Gospel of John's very interesting in this way, because the epilogue, the last chapter of the Gospel of John, Jesus says to Peter, "Shepherd my sheep." But he's not the most important apostle in the fourth gospel. It's the beloved disciple who's the one who has the inside track. So here you find a competition between the fourth gospel and the synoptics, where Matthew favors Peter, and he becomes the patron saint of the Petrine Church, whereas the beloved disciple becomes the patron saint of the so-called Johannine tradition. And then you have the Pauline tradition, of course, which is a different issue. And we haven't talked about the Gospel of Thomas, so that Thomas becomes identified. And in the history of Christendom, we find various apostles being championed as the heroes that are faithful, the most faithful transmitters of Jesus's legacy. And Matthew is the first person, as far as we know, to have singled out Peter as the one who's the most authoritative transmitter of the Jesus tradition. But Derek, do you want to say something about Caesarea Philippi?
Sure. So I guess the first thing I would want to say is, isn't it ironic that tradition has Peter attached to Mark? And really, they would have been just wise to say, oh yeah, Peter's attached to Matthew. Way better chances. At this point, you screwed yourself, because I would say your best guess is Paul's attached to Mark at best. Okay. And we talked about that earlier in our course, as I told you about my article. Caesarea Philippi. Caesarea Philippi is it's located up in the northern Galilee. It's good little distance, not too far from the Sea of Galilee, Lake of Galilee. You could travel on foot. I mean, it'll take you a little while, but this is how they did it back in the day. And in this area, Herod the Great built a fortress, actually a temple, to Caesar Augustus. And so when let's just put it this way, when things didn't pan out with his previous buddy, who was enemies of Caesar Augustus, of course, he kissed butt to Augustus and said, "You want to listen? You can kill me, and you probably want to. I get it, but if you keep me alive and spare me, I'll show you how true a friend I am." And of course, King Herod really showed it from maritime Caesarea to Caesarea Philippi. But here in this region where he built the temple to Augustus. For Augustus. Augustus is alive. There's the Temple of Pan, and there's a portal, literally a spring that comes out. The water rises and falls depending on the time of the year. And right there at this scene in Caesarea Philippi, this is where we went with Dr. James Tabor. And he stood there and he says, "Look around. What would you have seen? All of these other gods, sons of gods and men gods, even Caesars." And Jesus says, "Who do men say that I am? I'm competing. I'm in town, baby. Watch out." This is how they paint it. It's so good. And it put chills on my arms, because I was like, here's this Jewish guy, coming in out of nowhere. And he's like, "Who do men say that I am?" And they're like, "Some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, some say the prophet." And then he's like, "You're the Son of the living God." Peter does confess, but even then Jesus takes the confession from him right out the gate and goes, "You didn't know this. Flesh and blood did not reveal this to you. My Father told you." Because his father tells him at the beginning of the story, "You are the son. You are my son." So no, Peter doesn't know this. Only Father knows this. Of course, he reveals this and actually confesses it on the Mountain of Transfiguration, as you well teach in this course. But I just thought that was really ironic because it tells you, while this author may not be the most careful about all the details when we talk about the Lake of Galilee, the Sea of Galilee, this seems like at least they're aware in some way that Caesarea Philippi has temples to other gods, including Caesar Augustus, which Mark jabs at Caesar, and by copying or borrowing or mimetically adapting somehow the Aeneid, as you show in the course, which you're going to have to get the course. Like, there's so much that you did that highlighted when I stood there. Now I'm like, this son of a gun. What a slick, smart author. Yeah. And it's great. So be on the lookout. Get the course. You don't want to miss the course with Dennis. I'm telling you, it's only going to get better. Ladies and gentlemen, be sure to sign up for Dr. Dennis R. MacDonald's Greek Mimesis in the New Testament course, Reading the Gospels with One Eye on Greek Poetry. Dennis spends 18 lectures diving into several parallels, building up the methodology to show you his methods and how he sees that the New Testament authors cleverly rewrite and really make Jesus such a better figure than what we see in the older Greek myths and their poetry. You can sign up today, own it for life. There are several hours, well over 8 hours of content in this course with 18 lectures. Dennis gives you so much to read and look up and consider in investigating. Did the New Testament authors actually imitate the Greek epics to write their narratives about Jesus? There's several reading recommendations, additional resources under every single one of the lectures. You can download 1 through 18 on MP3 in case you want to just download it and have it in your whatever the device might be in order to work and listen at the same time. You don't have to just see it. But if you decide to watch the content, it is all in 4K, extremely high quality content, as you can see.
And you did it in from Greek, Latin.
The audio is nice and loud, takes you through his book. Dennis takes a deep dive. Be sure to sign up today. I hope you will. This helps Dennis MacDonald, and it helps educate the world on what's going on in scholarship.